What's the single most heroic act you've ever witnessed? Saw a car flip over on the highway. The second the car stopped sliding in the road, a guy came out with a bat, broke the windows, and grabbed 2 children out of the back seat and got the adults out. Saw something similar once. A man lost control due to a faulty brake powder placement and slammed into the car next to him with a dad and his son and daughter. Both cars bust through the guardrail and roll over each other into the grassy median. The family's car is actively on fire. I was with my parents about 20 yards back from the accident. My dad slammed on his brakes and jumped out to see if he could help. There was another man who was closer who jumped out of his truck, grabbed a piece of rebar out of the bed, and proceeded to book it to the cars. He smashed the windows of the family's car as my dad ran up, and they both pulled the kids out. The dad was wedged in there, and they were trying their hardest to get him out when suddenly the other driver in the accident appeared and pulled with Herculean strength to shift the steering column so my dad and the Samaritan could get the dad out. The car never exploded, and the worst injury was a collapsed lung and some broken ribs for the father. The kids had minor bruising and cuts, and the other driver had a gash on his head and his hands were a mess from pulling on the door frame and steering column the way he did. When the authorities investigated the accident, they found that the brake pads the first driver had just had replaced were faulty, and he was able to successfully sue the manufacturer for a tidy sum. He gave over half of the settlement to the dad, who was a single father. I consider the first driver the hero here. Even though he was injured in a horrible accident, he still found the courage to help the other injured parties, even going so far as to help them monetarily afterwards. There was a crowd outside my high school surrounding a very one-sided fight. A teacher came to break it up after what seemed like an extremely long minute. I found out later that this well-known bully had been shoving one of the smallest kids in my grade, trying to get him to fight back to no avail. This kid was doing his best to get away, but the bully would just grab him and throw him to the ground. Eventually, this kid steps in between them and says, "That's enough." He was probably average-sized, which was still smaller than the bully. The bully swings, the kid dodges and tackles him to the ground, starting the fight. The kid got the daylights beat out of him, but he was at least able to break the bully's nose. It takes major balls to willingly get into a fight you know you don't have a chance of winning. That kid became a hero in the school, and he definitely deserved it. I was once downtown getting groceries for my mother, and when I got out of the store, walking towards my bike, I see a mother crossing the street with groceries in one hand, her 3-year-old daughter in the other hand, and a 5 to 6 years old son a bit further behind. Just as the mother had crossed the street, her son started to cross the street as well. He didn't see the car coming towards him with about the speed of 50 kilometers per hour. A random stranger that is nearby turns his head and sees the car, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Instinctively, he just runs to the kid and grabs him, holds him tight with his back turned towards the car, literally half a second before impact. The windshield of the car gets smashed, and the guy holding the kid rolls over the car, somehow managing to land on his back. I run towards them to check if they're okay, and the kid is crying as well as the mother. That was the first time I called 911. The kid said his arm was hurting, but I don't know what actually happened to the guy and the kid, as I left after the ambulance came and I didn't really check up on it. To risk your life that fast just to save the life of another achieves a new level of heroics. Especially one who you don't know. My mother, who is probably the quietest and most unassuming person I know, stepped up into the middle of a domestic assault. We were doing some shopping and we came out of a store to see this huge guy take a swing at this girl while calling her all sorts of filthy names. He knocked the girl down and she stood up to get away, but he grabbed her and started shaking her and hitting her. The guy was easily 6 foot tall or taller and built like a brick house. My mother calmly told me to call 911 and she walked up to the guy telling him, "If you don't put her down, I'll beat your ass like your mother should have." I'm on the phone with the cops and I run over to help, as I'm afraid this guy is going to make short work of my mother. The guy threatens to beat my mother up, and before I can say anything, he raises his fist to hit her, and she slugged him so hard in the solar plexus that he just crumpled to the ground wheezing. At this point, several other bystanders who were just standing around came over and held the guy down until the cops got there. My mother, who was all of 5'2" and nearly 60 years old, stepped into the middle of a fight to keep a girl from getting hurt or killed. I've done absolutely nothing in my life that can compare to what she did. It was my 21st birthday, and friends and I decided to go to Rockville Center, Long Island, to go to some bars. The night was winding down when my girlfriend and I decided to go to the train station to get on the train home. When we got on the platform, I ran into two kids that I went to high school with. Both of them are lifeguards, and we got to talking. Out of the corner of my eye, I see an extremely drunk kid stumble over the platform and land face first, 5 feet down, on the tracks. This kid was around 6 feet, 200 plus pounds, and completely wasted. He was laying lifeless on the tracks when my two friends jumped down and attempted to rescue him. In the distance, the train starts blaring its horn, realizing that someone is on the tracks. My friends attempt to haul him up, but he is resisting them and throwing punches. When the train is around 50 feet away, one of the kids jumps back on the platform and hauls the drunk kid up. With literally 1 second to spare, the one who was pushing the drunk kid from the tracks gets on the platform, barely getting his feet up in time. This was so amazingly heroic, and these two kids are amazing while I was beta. In the spirit of the holiday season, my mom had a friend who was a nurse. The nurse was taking care of an elderly, dying man. It was Christmas, and the man's wish was to not die on Christmas because he couldn't do that to his grandchildren. The nurse wanted to respect his wish, but she also knew that he would not make it to midnight. So she turned the clock ahead about 5 or 6 hours and showed the man that it was no longer Christmas. The man passed peacefully, and the 26th went on his death certificate. I know an elderly woman and her husband who have been foster parents for more than 30 years. She's a retired nurse now, and he was in the Navy. They often foster the hard cases, usually children with severe disabilities, often terminally ill children. Without her and her husband, these children would have spent their whole lives living in medical or group home facilities with no concept of parents or family. I can't imagine the psychological toll this must have had on the couple throughout their years watching these sick or disabled kids come and go. Knowing them for a few years and then watching them die and then signing up to do it again, knowing if she didn't, who else would? They are extremely inspirational and beyond heroic to me. Not gonna lie, this isn't my story but a guy from works, but it's the best I've got. So this guy is working in the nose gear wheel well on a plane. I believe they said it was a DC-8 and it was on jacks. There was another guy working in there too, then some nutcase up in the cockpit, clearly unaware of their presence, tries to raise the gear. The first guy is in no position to get out of the well before the wheel races and the doors close. But the second guy is. Instead of getting out of the way, the second guy uses all of his strength to hold the doors open until the first guy got out. Those doors could have easily crushed him to death, and how he managed to hold them in such a way as to stop them or slow them down, I will never know. But that guy has balls of steel and definitely saved the first guy's life. After that, the only story I have is me pulling a guy out of the road when a speeding car was coming, but it really wasn't that impressive. Might not be that impressive, but he still saved his life. My actual memory of the event isn't that exciting. I was about 5, sitting on the ground and playing in the dirt with my shovel outside my grandparents' farmhouse one afternoon. My dad, grandpa, and a few uncles were on the roof fixing some shingles after a storm. Suddenly there was a massive thud and my grandfather appeared in front of me. He disappeared in the distance and lots of adults started shouting. That's all I remember. When I got older, my mom explained that my older sister, who was 9 years old at that time, had wandered into the barn to look at the horses and decided all by herself to let them out. She had gotten a rope and tied 2 stallions together and was walking them out to pasture when my grandfather saw her from the roof. For those unfamiliar with horses, stallions do not like each other, and standing between them when they start to fight is certain death. That 73-year-old man leapt off the roof and literally hit the ground running, bolted to my sister, scooped her up and kept running. The horses started ripping into each other a moment later. My friends and I were all at the lake riding a pair of wave runners that one of my friends owned. There were about 5 to 6 of us in total. We had just finished up a ride, docked the wave runners, and began to grill some carne asada and seasoned chicken. Dank stuff. We were high off Vicodin, smoking some bowls and even tossing a few beers back. You know, your typical lonely summer Tuesday at the lake. Now, the south shore of this lake had a little island that was probably about 50 to 75 yards away, and a lot of people liked to swim to it for fun. The thing is, it's actually the kind of a good distance away for those who are out of shape, too young or too old, or simply can't swim. Well, in the midst of joking around, we were all about 17 to 20 years old, by the way. We hear a faint yell and think nothing of it. Then again, I stop and ask my friends, "Did you hear that? Listen." We hear it again and we come to realize it's a gargled cry for help. We search the water as fast as possible and see a man about halfway to the island, struggling to stay afloat in the water. Almost on the shore of the island are 2 other people who are pointing and yelling to the man drowning. My friend and I, Paul, run to the jet skis and power them up, each of us on one. Now, the adrenaline is through the roof right now, but everything we are doing feels as though it was just natural instinct. You hear a cry for help and you just go. I sort of panicked and didn't think to push the wave runner from the sand before getting on and gassing it. So I got stuck behind and have my other friends push me out when my friend Paul pushed the other jet ski out and takes off ahead of me. At this point, we are going as fast as we can on the wave runners, probably about 200 yards away from where he was in total. We have life jackets on and I have an extra on my wave runner for the guy who is drowning. But Paul decides to do what would look like the most badass thing and jumped off his wave runner to save the guy. However, he doesn't have an extra life jacket. I had heard it all too well prior to this that you don't save a drowning person with your own body, because they will literally climb you to stay afloat and consequently drown you. So when I see Paul do this, I freak out because I realize it's about a 250 to 300 pounds black man who is drowning, and he does exactly what I had just thought would go down. He starts to suffocate Paul, but luckily I get there in time to toss him another life jacket and rope attached to a floaty device. He gets off Paul and everyone gets on the wave runners. He thanked us repeatedly while he gathered his breath, and then we picked up his 2 little brothers on the island, who coincidentally went to high school with us, and we all knew each other semi-well from sports. They were so grateful, and when we dropped them off at their camp on shore, their whole family was offering us anything and everything to eat and drink for having saved his life. It was crazy to say the least, but it's really weird thinking about how me pushing to go to the lake that day ended up in saving someone's life. He would have no doubt had drowned had we not been there with those speeding machines. My dad ran back into the mall that had an armed gunman in it after he just ushered my mother and I out to go find my sister. While in there, he stopped and helped the man shot and stabilized him until emergency help could get there. I was in Bermuda cliff jumping. This kid I met and became pretty friendly with on the rocks, 30 feet up about, jumped first and was waiting for me to jump since it was a pretty long swim back to where you can climb back up. After we jumped, I didn't realize how strong the current was and how choppy it was. I ended up having to drag my newly met friend into the shore. It was probably the most scared I had ever been. There was a point where I thought I was going to drown myself due to fatigue. I am a strong swimmer. I was a swim team member and ex-beach lifeguard. The scariest part was thinking, do I leave him and try to get back for help or risk us both not making it back? Rule of thumb when the lifeguard asks for you not to find random cliffs to jump off of? Listen. My wife giving birth to our second child. With her first child, she had an epidural and actually commented that it was easier than expected. But the second child came fast, and by the time we got to the hospital, it was too late for an epidural. She pushed and pushed, and I saw the woman I love working in more pain than I've ever seen another human experience. This went on for what felt like ages, and then I saw her hit her wall. She had nothing left, no strength, and she was in incredible pain and incredibly tired. Then the midwife said that the baby's pulse was slowing and that they needed to get it out of her right away. That was all she needed to hear. My wife found the strength from somewhere and pushed out a healthy little dude. Not to sound cheesy, and please don't call me a white knight or something like that, but childbirth is one of the most heroic acts there is, and just because it goes on every day doesn't diminish it. I didn't witness it, but my dad came home one night really shaken up. He apparently saw a woman sitting on the ledge of a bridge crossing over the highway. He pulled over and simply talked to her. He found out her name, where she was from, why she was about to throw herself off, everything. He asks her, "Can I hold your hand for a second?" She agrees, and as soon as he has a hold of her, he pulls her to safety and wrestles her to the ground and calls 911. While waiting for help, he starts crying and telling her, "Jesus loves you, I love you, please don't do this." Both of them are in tears and just sitting with their backs on the ledge when the police or an ambulance, I can't remember, show up and take her away. I don't know if he thinks about it much anymore since it happened a couple of years ago, but it crosses my mind a couple of times a week.